The Spanish sun was a blinding, merciless white as it beat down on the terracotta tiles of the balcony, but I was shivering as if I'd been plunged into an Arctic lake. I stood in my best friend's guest room in Marbella, clutching a silver Rolex with a distinctive scratch across the sapphire glass, a watch I had personally engraved with our wedding anniversary 6 years ago. My husband was supposed to be 3,000 miles away, sitting through a grueling quarterly review in a windowless boardroom in Chicago, yet his watch was resting on Clara's nightstand, right next to a half-empty glass of red wine and a discarded silk robe that smelled exactly like his favorite sandalwood cologne. The weight of the metal in my palm felt like lead, pulling my arm down as the room began to spin. My vision blurred at the edges, tunneling until all I could see was that tiny, mocking inscription on the back. "Forever is just the beginning." I felt a sudden, violent surge of nausea, the kind that starts in the pit of your stomach and crawls up your throat until you're gasping for air. My knees hit the rug before I even realized I was falling, the air leaving my lungs in a ragged, broken sob that I had to stifle with my free hand. I wasn't just a visitor in a beautiful villa. I was a ghost, haunting the scene of a crime I wasn't supposed to witness. To understand how I ended up on that floor, you have to understand the life I thought I was living. Back in Seattle, my world was built on a foundation of cedarwood, rain-slicked windows, and the comfortable, predictable rhythm of a 15-year marriage. Mark was my anchor, a man whose reliability was so absolute it was almost boring. Every morning he would grind the coffee beans, the sound a familiar domestic roar, and bring me a mug with exactly 2 splashes of oat milk while I was still buried under the duvet. We had our rituals: Friday night Thai food, Sunday morning walks through the Arboretum, and the Lakeside Project. The Lakeside Project was more than just a house. It was my legacy. My grandmother had left me a sprawling, dilapidated Victorian on the shores of Lake Washington, a place filled with the ghosts of my happiest childhood memories. For 3 years, I had poured every spare cent of my salary as a landscape architect and every ounce of my soul into restoring it. Mark had been my biggest cheerleader, or so it seemed. He'd spend his weekends helping me strip wallpaper or consulting with the contractors, his hands calloused and dusty, his smile wide as he talked about how we'd retire there. Because I trusted him more than I trusted my own reflection, I had done the one thing my lawyer had advised against. I put his name on the deed. "What's mine is yours," I'd told him, laughing as I handed him the pen. He had kissed me then, a long, lingering kiss that felt like a promise. Then there was Clara. Clara had been the sister I never had. We grew up in the same suburban cul-de-sac, shared a bunk bed at summer camp, and cried on each other's shoulders through every heartbreak of our 20s. When she moved to Spain 15 years ago to find herself and eventually open a boutique art gallery, it felt like a limb had been severed. But we kept the connection alive. We had weekly Skype sessions that lasted for hours, and her Instagram was a curated gallery of sun-drenched plazas and vibrant paintings. She was the free spirit, the one who escaped the mundane, while I was the one who stayed behind and built a nest. "You have to come, Elena," she had pleaded over the phone 2 months ago, her voice sounding thin and distant over the satellite delay. "The gallery is finally thriving, the villa is finished, and I miss you so much it hurts. Just 2 weeks. Mark can survive without you for 2 weeks, can't he?" Mark had been the one to push me. "Go," he'd said, tucking a stray hair behind my ear as we sat on our porch. "You've worked yourself to the bone on the lakeside house. You deserve a break. Besides, I have that huge merger in Chicago coming up. I'll be buried in paperwork anyway. It's the perfect timing." I remembered the morning I left. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and pine. Mark had hugged me at the airport gate, his coat smelling of the expensive laundry detergent I always bought. He'd held me a second longer than usual, his grip almost desperate. I thought it was love. I thought he was going to miss me as much as I was going to miss him. I watched him walk away toward the parking garage, his shoulders square, never looking back. The flight to Malaga was long, a blur of stale pretzels and fitful sleep, but the excitement of seeing Clara kept me upright. When I stepped out of the arrivals terminal, the heat hit me like a physical wall, smelling of sea salt and diesel. Clara was there, looking radiant in a flowing linen dress, her hair bleached golden by the Mediterranean sun. She hugged me so hard I could hear her heart beating. "I can't believe you're finally here," she whispered into my hair. The first 3 days were a dream. We drank crisp white wine on her terrace, overlooking the sparkling turquoise of the sea. She showed me her gallery, a white-walled sanctuary of modern art that seemed to be doing incredibly well, far better than I expected for a small startup in a competitive market. She was generous, paying for every meal, driving me around in a sleek new convertible. She asked a lot of questions about the lakeside house, about its value, about when the final renovations would be complete. I thought she was just being a supportive friend, interested in my success, but there were cracks I chose to ignore. The way Clara would disappear into the other room to take business calls late at night. The way she'd flinch if I picked up her phone to check the time. And then there was the contractor she mentioned. A man she said was helping her with some structural issues in the villa. Someone she claimed was shy and preferred to work when I was out sightseeing. On the 4th morning, Clara told me she had to run an errand in Seville and wouldn't be back until late. "Sleep in, enjoy the pool, make yourself at home," she'd said, kissing my cheek before vanishing. I had decided to surprise her by doing a bit of light cleaning. I was looking for an extra set of linens in the guest wing, a part of the house she'd asked me not to wander into because of the renovations, when I saw the door to the master suite slightly ajar. I shouldn't have gone in. I should have stayed by the pool. But a stray breeze caught the door, swinging it wide, and the first thing I smelled wasn't the sea or the jasmine climbing the walls. It was sandalwood. My heart stuttered. It was the exact blend Mark had custom-ordered for years. I walked toward the bed, my footsteps silent on the plush rug. The room was beautiful, filled with light, but as I reached the nightstand, my world didn't just crack, it shattered. There, sitting next to a stack of architectural magazines featuring lakefront properties, was the watch. The Rolex I had bought him after his first big promotion. The Rolex he told me he'd lost at the gym 3 months ago. I picked it up, my fingers trembling so violently the metal clinked against the wood. I looked at the bed, the pillow still indented from 2 heads. On the floor, partially tucked under the bed frame, was a man's dress shirt. I reached down and pulled it out. It was a bespoke white cotton shirt with M.A. embroidered on the cuff. Mark Avery. The silence of the villa became deafening, a roaring sound in my ears that drowned out the distant chirping of cicadas. I wasn't just in Spain visiting a friend. I was in the middle of a trap that had been set months, perhaps years ago, and as I looked out the window, I saw Clara's car pulling back into the driveway much earlier than expected, and she wasn't alone. A man was stepping out of the passenger side, adjusting his sunglasses, his movements familiar down to the way he rolled his sleeves. It was Mark, and he wasn't in Chicago. I scrambled away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The sound of the car door slamming echoed through the open courtyard, sharp as gunshots. I couldn't let them find me here, not like this, looking like a ghost in the middle of their sanctuary. My brain was screaming, a high-pitched frequency that made it hard to think, but my survival instinct took over. I bolted toward the large walk-in closet in the corner of the master suite, slipping inside and pulling the heavy, carved oak door shut just as the front door of the villa creaked open. Safe in the darkness of the closet, surrounded by the scent of Clara's expensive perfumes and the faint, unmistakable musk of Mark's cologne, I felt a wave of cold sweat break across my forehead. My breath was shallow and jagged. I pressed my back against a row of silk dresses, the cool fabric doing nothing to soothe the heat radiating from my skin. Through the slight gap in the door hinges, I could hear them. They weren't whispering. They weren't hiding. They were laughing. "I'm telling you, she's probably half asleep by the pool with those noise-canceling headphones on," Mark said. His voice was casual, light, the voice he used when we were deciding what movie to watch on a Tuesday night. "Elena could sleep through a hurricane if she's had a glass of wine." "Don't be so mean," Clara giggled, and the sound made my skin crawl. It was a girlish, flirtatious sound I hadn't heard from her in years. "She's just trusting. It's one of her best qualities, Mark. It's why we're here, after all." As I stood there in the dark, the pieces of the last 6 months began to click together with a sickening, metallic precision. I remembered the business trips to Chicago that always seemed to happen when Clara was traveling for art auctions. I remembered Mark's sudden interest in our joint bank accounts, his insistent questions about the exact wording of my grandmother's will regarding the lakeside house. He had been so helpful, so attentive, offering to take the administrative burden off my shoulders while I focused on the garden designs. I recalled a night 3 months ago when I'd found a crumpled receipt in his pocket for a jewelry store I didn't recognize. When I asked him about it, he'd smiled that boyish, crooked smile and told me he was saving up for a surprise for our anniversary. I had felt guilty for even questioning him. I had kissed him and told him I didn't need jewelry as long as I had him. I wanted to scream at that past version of myself, to reach through time and shake her until her teeth rattled. The bedroom door opened. I froze, holding my breath until my lungs burned. "God, it's hot," Mark grunted. I heard the sound of a belt hitting the floor, then the rustle of clothes. "How much longer do we have to play this game, Clara? Having her in the guest wing is pushing it. I almost walked into her yesterday morning when I was going for coffee." "Just a few more days," Clara replied. I heard the bed creak as she sat down. "The buyer from the Dubai group is coming to the gallery on Thursday. Once the preliminary papers for the lakeside property are signed and the power of attorney is finalized, we're done. You'll have the cash, I'll have the gallery expansion, and Elena will have a very expensive lesson in why you should never trust a man with a deed." My stomach did a violent somersault. Power of attorney? I hadn't signed anything like that. I had given him rights to manage the renovation accounts, but never the authority to sell. "She doesn't suspect a thing?" Mark asked, his voice muffled, probably as he pulled on a fresh shirt. "Not a glimmer," Clara said confidently. "She thinks I'm her best friend. She thinks you're a saint. Honestly, Mark, it's almost too easy. She's so focused on those damn historical preservation details of the house that she hasn't even noticed the mail isn't reaching her anymore. I've been redirecting her bank statements to my gallery address for months." I felt as though the floor had vanished beneath me. I was hovering in a void of pure, unadulterated betrayal. This wasn't just an affair. This was a systematic dismantling of my entire life. They weren't just stealing my husband or my friend. They were stealing my history, my home, and my future. I waited until I heard them head back out toward the terrace, their voices fading into the distance. I waited another 5 minutes, my heart rhythm slowly changing from a panicked flutter to a heavy, rhythmic thrum of adrenaline. When I finally stepped out of the closet, I wasn't the same woman who had entered it. The softness in my eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I walked over to the vintage writing desk in the corner of the room. Clara was organized, always had been. She kept her life in neat, leather-bound folders. I began to leaf through them, my hands steady now, fueled by a simmering rage that felt like liquid nitrogen in my veins. And then I found it. A thick manila envelope tucked inside a folder labeled Project Lake. I pulled the contents out, and my breath hitched. There it was. A quitclaim deed for the lakeside house, already signed and notarized. I stared at the bottom of the page. My signature was there. It looked perfect, the elegant E, the slightly looped L. But I knew I hadn't signed it. Mark had spent years watching me sign checks, watching me sign contracts. He had practiced this. He had perfected the art of erasing me. Attached to the deed was a series of emails between Mark and a man named S. Vance. "The wife is in Spain," one email read, sent from Mark's private account just 3 days ago. "She's completely distracted. Clara has her occupied. Proceed with the title transfer. We need the funds in the escrow account by the 15th. I want to be moved into the Marbella Villa permanently by next month. Make sure the accident with the original will is handled. We don't want any probate issues later." The accident with the original will. My grandmother's original will, the one that explicitly stated the house could never be sold to developers, was kept in a fireproof safe in our Seattle home. Or it had been. A wave of physical illness washed over me, so strong I had to lean against the desk to keep from vomiting. The room felt like it was tilting at a 45-degree angle. The colors of the beautiful Spanish villa seemed to bleed into a muddy, ugly gray. Every memory of the last decade, every holiday, every shared laugh, every time Mark had held me while I cried, was a lie. It was a long-form performance, a theatrical production where I was the only person who didn't know the script. I looked down at the forged deed in my hand. The paper felt oily, disgusting. I wanted to set it on fire, to burn this whole house down with them inside it. But I knew that wouldn't get me my life back. I looked at the Rolex on the nightstand. My husband, the man I had loved for 15 years, was 20 feet away on a terrace, sipping wine with my best friend, planning how to leave me penniless and homeless. They thought I was a trusting fool. They thought I was a victim. I carefully put the documents back exactly as I had found them. I wiped my damp palms on my jeans and took a long, shaky breath. My vision was no longer blurred. It was sharp, focused on the path ahead. They wanted to play a game of shadows? Fine. But they had forgotten one thing. I was a landscape architect. I knew exactly how to reshape the earth, how to dig up the roots of a rot, and how to build something indestructible from the ruins. I stepped out of the bedroom, my footsteps silent, and began to head toward the back stairs. The trusting Elena died in that closet. The woman walking out of it was someone they hadn't met yet, and she was going to burn their world to the ground. I walked onto the terrace with the grace of a woman who had nothing left to lose. The sun was dipping below the horizon, bleeding shades of violet and bruised orange across the Mediterranean sky. Mark was sitting with his back to me, his hand resting familiarly on Clara's thigh. They were laughing at something low and private, the sound of their shared intimacy, a jagged blade scraping against my nerves. "The air in Chicago must be very different this time of year," I said, my voice steady and ice-cold. Mark froze. I watched the muscles in his back go rigid, his shoulders hunching as if he were expecting a physical blow. He didn't turn around immediately. Beside him, Clara's glass stopped halfway to her lips. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like it had its own gravity, pulling the air out of the space between us. When Mark finally turned, his face went from sun-kissed to the color of wet cement. He looked older, smaller, trapped. "Elena," he breathed, the name sounding like a curse. What are you... Why aren't you at the beach? The beach was boring, Mark, so I came back to look for some extra towels. Imagine my surprise when I found your watch instead. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the Rolex, letting it dangle by the strap before dropping it onto the glass table. The clack of the metal against the glass was like a gavel striking a bench. Clara was the first to recover. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed, like I was a waiter who had brought the wrong order. She slowly set her wineglass down and leaned back, crossing her legs. "Well," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth she'd been using all week. "I suppose the trusting friend act is over. It was getting exhausting anyway." "Clara, shut up," Mark hissed, finally standing up. He took a step toward me, his hands reaching out as if to steady me. "Elena, honey, please. It's not what it looks like. We were going to tell you. It's complicated. I came here because Clara was having a crisis with the gallery, and I didn't want to worry you." "Stop," I said, the word a sharp crack. "Do not use your worried husband voice on me ever again. I saw the folder, Mark. I saw the forged deed. I saw the emails to S. Vance about the accident with my grandmother's will." The blood drained from his face completely then. He looked at Clara, his eyes wide and pleading, but she didn't help him. She just watched us with a look of bored detachment. "You went through my things?" Clara asked, her voice sharpening. "In my house? That's incredibly low, Elena, even for you." "Your house?" I let out a harsh, jagged laugh. "This villa was bought with the money Mark embezzled from our joint renovation fund over the last 2 years, wasn't it? The unforeseen plumbing issues and the structural reinforcements at the lakeside house, that money didn't go to contractors. It went to your down payment here. I didn't just find a watch, Clara. I found the paper trail of how you both systematically bled me dry while I was busy picking out paint colors for a home you were planning to steal." Mark finally found his voice, but it was weak, a pathetic tremor. "It wasn't like that. We needed a start. The lakeside house is worth millions, Elena. You were never going to sell it. You were going to let all that equity just sit there while we struggled." "Struggled?" I cut him off, stepping closer until I was inches from him. I could smell the wine on his breath and the expensive Spanish sun on his skin. "You make 6 figures, Mark. We were never struggling. You were just greedy. And you," I turned to Clara, "my best friend. You've been planning this since the day you moved here, haven't you? This wasn't a gallery. It was a laundromat for the money he was funneling to you." Clara stood up then, smoothing her silk dress. She walked over to the edge of the terrace and looked out at the sea. "You always were so sentimental, Elena. It's your biggest flaw. You think houses and wills and friendships are sacred. To us, they're just assets. And honestly, you should thank us. Mark was miserable with you. He was bored to death of your historical preservation talk and your little garden projects. He wanted a life that actually had some fire in it." "So you decided to burn mine to the ground to get it?" I asked. "We didn't burn it," she said, turning back with a cruel smile. "We just liquidated it. And it's already done, Elena. The power of attorney you signed 3 weeks ago? It's already been used to clear out your 401k. That money is already in an offshore account that you'll never touch. The lakeside house? The closing is on Thursday. By the time you get back to Seattle, you'll find the locks changed and a demolition crew ready to turn your grandmother's precious legacy into a luxury condo complex." I felt a physical blow to my chest. My 401k, my entire life savings, my grandmother's house, demolished? The world tilted. I felt the bile rise in my throat, and I had to grab the back of a chair to keep from falling. My heart wasn't just breaking, it was being ground into the dust. "Mark?" I whispered, looking at him, searching for any shred of the man I had loved for 15 years. Is this true? You're letting her do this? You're letting her destroy the house? You know what it meant to me. You were there when I cried after my grandmother died. You held me. Mark looked down at his feet. He couldn't meet my eyes. He shifted his weight, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. It's a lot of money, Elena, he muttered to the floor. More than we could ever make in a lifetime. We can start over. Somewhere else. You'll get a settlement, eventually. A settlement? I screamed, the sound echoing off the stone walls of the villa. You forged my signature! You stole my inheritance! And you're standing there talking about a settlement? Don't yell at him, Clara snapped. It's pathetic. You've already lost. If you try to fight this, we'll just point to the medical records. I froze. What medical records? Clara stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. The ones Mark has been carefully cultivating. The appointments with the specialist you didn't know he was talking to. The notes about your early onset memory lapses and unstable behavior. Why do you think your coffee always tasted a little bitter lately? A little bit of sedative here, a little bit of confusion there? Mark's been a very concerned husband, documenting your decline for months. If you go to the police, we'll just say you're having a breakdown. Who are they going to believe? The successful businessman and his grieving friend? Or the woman who can't even remember signing a legal document? The horror of it was a cold, suffocating blanket. The bitter coffee. The days I had felt groggy and disconnected, which Mark told me was just stress. It wasn't stress. It was him. He had been drugging me. He had been preparing to have me declared incompetent if I ever found out. I looked at Mark, my vision blurring with tears of pure, unadulterated rage. He still wouldn't look up. He was a coward, a hollow shell of a man being puppeteered by the woman I had once called my sister. You're monsters, I whispered, the words trembling with the weight of my realization. Maybe, Clara said, picking up her wine again, but we're monsters with your money. Now I think it's time you left. You can stay in a hotel tonight. I'll have your bag sent to the lobby in the morning. Don't bother coming back here. I looked from Clara's triumphant face to Mark's slumped, silent form. The silence of the man I had shared a bed with for over a decade was the loudest thing in the room. It was the sound of a final, total betrayal. I felt a click inside me. It wasn't a break. It was an ignition. The sadness didn't vanish, but it was suddenly encased in a layer of crystalline, lethal ice. They thought they had won because they had the papers and the money. They thought I was the same trusting girl who had arrived 4 days ago. You're right, Clara, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. I straightened my spine, wiping the tears from my face with a slow, deliberate motion. I am sentimental, and I do care about legacies. But there's one thing you forgot about me. I walked to the table, picked up the Rolex, and looked Mark right in the eye. He finally looked up, and for the first time, he looked afraid of me. I'm an architect, I said, my voice echoing with a power I didn't know I possessed. I know how to read a blueprint, and I know exactly where the load-bearing walls are. You think you've built this perfect little life on top of my ruin? You haven't seen anything yet. I'm going to take every single thing you love, this villa, your gallery, your freedom, and I'm going to watch them crumble until there isn't even a handful of dust left for you to cling to. Is that a threat? Clara sneered, though her grip on her wineglass tightened. No, I said, turning toward the door. It's a demolition order. I didn't go to a hotel that night. I drove the rental car to a dark overlook above the Marbella coastline and sat in the silence, the Rolex heavy in my pocket. My hands were no longer shaking. The nausea had been replaced by a focused, predatory stillness. They thought I was a gardener who only knew how to make things grow, but they had forgotten that a landscape architect also knows how to clear the land. I opened my laptop, the screen a pale blue ghost in the dark car. Mark was arrogant. He believed I was tech illiterate because I preferred hand-drawn blueprints to digital renderings. He had never bothered to change the syncing permissions on our old home server, the one we used for the Lakeside project. I logged into the cloud and began to dig. Within 2 hours, I found the hidden folder. It wasn't even encrypted. It contained high-resolution scans of my signature, side by side with his practice attempts. It contained a PDF of the villa's purchase agreement, funded by loans from our joint renovation account that were never intended to be repaid. And most importantly, I found the search history. Long-term effects of scopolamine, symptoms of early-onset dementia, and how to sell property with power of attorney in Washington state. I didn't cry. I felt a strange, detached sense of wonder at the sheer scale of his cruelty. At 3 a.m., I called Julian. Julian was my father's oldest friend and the meanest forensic accountant in the Pacific Northwest. "Elena?" His voice was raspy with sleep. "It's the middle of the night. Is everything okay?" "Julian," I said, my voice as sharp as a diamond, "I need you to freeze every account associated with the Lakeside Project and the Avery Trust. Mark and Clara have been embezzling for years. I have the digital trail, the forgery practice, and the evidence of him drugging me. I need an emergency injunction to stop the sale of the house on Thursday. And Julian, I want the Spanish authorities notified about the villa. It was bought with stolen funds. I want the ground pulled out from under them." The next 48 hours were a blur of international phone calls, digital affidavits, and the cold, hard math of revenge. I learned that the Dubai group Clara mentioned was actually a legitimate investment firm that had no idea they were purchasing a stolen asset. I contacted their legal department directly. By Wednesday afternoon, I had a team of Spanish lawyers and a Seattle-based litigation squad working in a pincer movement. On Thursday morning, the day of the closing and the celebratory exhibition at Clara's gallery, I returned to the villa. I didn't sneak in this time. I walked through the front door just as they were preparing to leave. Clara was dressed in a stunning white jumpsuit, looking every bit the successful mogul. Mark was in a tailored suit, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. "I told you to leave," Clara said, her voice dropping to a low snarl. "Do I need to call the police?" "Actually, I already called them," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "They should be here in about 10 minutes, along with the representatives from the Marbella Tax Authority and a process server from Seattle." Mark's face went white. "Elena, what have you done?" "I read your emails, Mark, all of them. I found the practice signatures. I found the search history for the drugs you put in my coffee." I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt nothing but a profound sense of pity. "The closing on the Lakeside house isn't happening. The investment group pulled out 2 hours ago when my lawyers presented the evidence of title fraud. And the injunction I filed? It doesn't just stop the sale. It freezes all assets under your name, including the funds you used to loan Clara for this villa." Clara stepped forward, her face contorted with rage. "You're lying! You can't prove anything! This is my gallery, my life!" "It's a crime scene, Clara," I interrupted. "The money used to buy this villa was taken from a trust that had a spendthrift clause. My grandmother knew men like Mark existed. She made it so that any withdrawal over $50,000 required a physical signature and a thumbprint at the bank. You didn't just forge a deed, Mark. You committed bank fraud on a federal level. The FBI is already looking into the wire transfers." Mark collapsed onto the hallway bench, the very same one where we had sat and laughed on my first day here. He buried his face in his hands. He didn't say a word. He didn't try to defend her. He didn't even look at me. It was the silence I had expected, the silence of a man who was only brave when his victim was blind. "Mark!" Clara screamed, shaking his shoulder. "Say something! Tell her she's wrong!" Mark remained silent, a hollowed-out shell of a person. The siren of the Spanish National Police began to wail in the distance, climbing the hills toward the villa. "You should have stuck to gardening, Clara," I said, walking toward the door as the first police cruiser pulled into the driveway. "You're a terrible architect. You forgot that if you build a house on a foundation of lies, it doesn't matter how pretty the view is. It's always going to collapse." The aftermath was a long, grueling year of depositions, court dates, and rebuilding. Mark avoided a maximum sentence by turning on Clara, providing evidence of her role in the embezzlement in exchange for a plea deal. He's currently serving 5 years in a federal facility. Clara's gallery was liquidated to pay back the stolen funds, and she is still tied up in the Spanish legal system, facing charges of money laundering and fraud. She lost everything: the villa, the reputation, the fire she so desperately wanted. As for me, I went back to Seattle. I'm sitting on the porch of the lakeside house now. The sun is setting over the water, turning the lake into a sheet of hammered gold. The house didn't get demolished. Instead, I finished the restoration. The cedar smells sweet, and the original Victorian stained glass in the entryway catches the light, throwing patterns of ruby and emerald across the floor. The silence here is different now. It's not the silence of secrets or the grogginess of drugged sleep. It's the silence of a house that is finally at peace. I have a new garden, one filled with native plants that don't need constant tending, hardy things that can survive a frost and come back stronger. I look down at my wrist. It's bare. I sold the Rolex and used the money to plant a grove of birch trees near the water's edge. They're young now, but they'll grow. I've learned that the most beautiful things aren't the ones that stay the same forever. They're the ones that have the strength to be broken, cleared away, and replanted from the heart of the ruins. I am no longer the trusting girl who flew to Spain. I am the woman who owns her land, her name, and her future. And as the last of the light fades, I realize that the most powerful thing you can ever build isn't a house. It's the person who lives inside it. Betrayal is a fire, but it doesn't have to consume you. If you're careful, you can use the heat to forge something that can never be broken again.